The candle nearest her hand had burned all the way to its socket. She noticed this the way she noticed everything, quietly, without expression, cataloging it like a small wound. The wax had pooled and hardened on the stone beside her fingers. Cold now. She did not remember it being lit. She did not remember much of the ceremony at all, only the weight of the crown above her head, not on it, never on it, and the sound of another woman's name rising through the rafters of the great hall like smoke. She had bowed. She had bowed very deliberately, very precisely, the way her mother had taught her. Chin low, spine straight, eyes to the floor so no one would see what lived behind them. She had not expected it to feel like drowning. No one had told her that stepping aside would feel like being erased. No one had said the hall would smell of pine resin and winter roses. His scent, she realized only then, or that the crowd's applause would press against her ribs like something trying to break through. She straightened. She folded her hands. She did not look at the throne. And she told herself, with the particular discipline of someone who has survived by believing her own lies, that it was over. Her name was Seraphine Vale, and she had been raised to serve the crown without ever wearing it. Third daughter of a house that had once commanded armies and now commanded only debts. She had been sent to the palace at 14 as a ward, which was the polite word for hostage, and had spent the years since learning everything the court required of her and volunteering nothing it did not ask. She had learned which lords drank too much at the winter feasts and which ones didn't drink enough. She had learned where the drafts ran cold in the east corridor and how the king's steward always tilted his head right when he was lying. She had learned the palace the way a person learns a language they were never meant to speak fluently, enough to survive. Never enough to belong. She had also, somewhere in the long quiet of the years, learned Aldrich, not in the way the court assumed. They assumed everything about her, in the way courts always did with women who held their faces still. They assumed sentiment. Obsession, a small and ordinary love that had nowhere to go. They assumed she had hoped. They were not entirely wrong, but they had the shape of it wrong. What she knew of Aldrich Vane, AlphaKing of the Veldrath Reaches, was not the broad strokes the court traded in ballads and speculation. She knew the specific things. The way he went still when he was angry, not rigid, not loud, just still, the way a blade goes still before it moves. The way he read correspondence twice before responding, even messages that required no thought. The way he carried grief like a stone in his chest that he had decided, long ago, he would simply learn to breathe around. She knew these things because she had watched him, for years, the way careful. People watch things they cannot have. She had not intended to love him. She had, in fact, done everything a sensible woman could do to prevent it. And she had failed, quietly and completely, and had decided. The only dignified response was to say nothing, want nothing, and step away before the wanting became visible. So when the betrothal was announced, Lady Asara of the Northern Fells, young and titled and entirely suitable, Seraphine had been the first to bow. It was a calculated act. A gift she gave herself disguised as grace. If she bowed first, before anyone could watch her not bow, then the bowing belonged to her. It was hers. She had chosen it. That was what she told herself. The candle, she thought again, looking at the cold wax. Someone should have replaced it. The hall had thinned now, the crowd dispersing toward the feast tables, laughter cutting through the high-ceilinged air. She had positioned herself near the western arch, close enough to be present, far enough to be peripheral. In a moment she would slip away entirely, walk the long route back to her chamber, and begin the quiet work of making herself smaller in a place she had already been trying to disappear from. She did not hear him approach. She heard everything else first, the shift in the crowd's attention, the way conversations nearest her went briefly uncertain, the rustle of bodies adjusting their posture without deciding to. The room changed its shape the way it always did when Aldrich moved through it, not because he commanded it. Because he was the kind of presence that space rearranged itself around, instinctively, the way water parts for stone. She did not turn. You bowed before the announcement was finished. His voice was low, not gentle, it had never been gentle exactly, but careful. controlled. The kind of voice that had learned, she suspected, to carry less than it felt. She turned then, unhurried. "I knew how it would end," she said. He was watching her with those eyes that caught the candlelight the way still water. Catches fire, not reflecting it, just holding it, somewhere behind the surface. A muscle moved in his jaw. "You didn't congratulate her." "I congratulated the House of Fells. That is the correct form." "That," he said, "is not what I asked." She looked at him directly, which she rarely did, because it cost something. He was still in his ceremonial armor, the dark iron of it catching the torchlight in shades of charcoal and old copper. There was a tension in his shoulders that the evening's celebration had not released. She noticed the way he was standing, not toward the feast, not toward the new betrothed, not toward any of the directions a man celebrating should be standing. He was standing toward her. "Then ask what you mean," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not much. A loosening at the corner of his mouth, quickly controlled. He was not a man who showed surprise, but she had learned to read the small places where it happened anyway. "Are you well?" he said, and it was not exactly a question. She looked at the dead candle. Back at him. "I am always well," she said. "That is the one thing I have always been." She excused herself before he could answer, because there are some silences a person can survive and some they cannot, and she had used up her tolerance for they. Later at the ceremony, she did not look back. She told herself, walking through the western arch and into the cold of the corridor, that she had handled it. She had not handled it. 3 days after the betrothal ceremony, Lord Casson of the River Marches requested an audience with the king. Seraphine knew this because she was in the adjacent anteroom when the request arrived. She was always in adjacent rooms, had made a study of adjacency, of being present without being central, and she heard the name and felt something go cold. In the back of her mind, Lord Casson, 40 years old, soft-spoken, with a reputation for careful patience that the court read as temperance and that Seraphine had always read as something else. She had watched him, over years, in the particular way she watched people whose stillness seemed performed. She had noticed the way his eyes moved when Seraphine's name was mentioned in council. She had noticed the questions he asked about her house, her status, her remaining connections. She had not known what he wanted. She had known it was not nothing. She found out 2 hours later, in a conversation she was not supposed to hear, because she was standing in an alcove behind a tapestry that everyone had forgotten was large enough to stand behind. Lord Casson's offer was simple and methodical, the way his everything was. He would clear House Vale's debts, all of them, in full, in exchange for one thing. Seraphine's hand, and with it, her permanent removal from the palace and from any orbit of the crown. He said it pleasantly, the way you describe a trade in grain. He said that it would be a kindness, really, given her situation. That a woman of her position, with her connections severed, had very few options remaining. That he was offering her security. That she should be grateful. She stood behind the tapestry and breathed through it, steady and silent, and thought, with the part of herself that had always been more ruthlessly honest than was comfortable. He is not wrong about the situation. The debts were real. Her brothers had seen to that, methodically and without. Intending to. The palace position was a courtesy, not a right. Without it, she had a title and nothing behind it. Without the debts cleared, she had obligations she could not meet from the salary of a warden-waiting. She had known this day would come in some form. She had not known it would come while she still smelled pine resin on the air of a great hall. She slipped out of the alcove. She walked to her chamber. She sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her palms flat against the blanket and breathed through that too. It was Myra who found her. Myra had been her one constant in the palace for 6 years. Not a lady's maid, exactly, more a companion who had arrived as assigned staff and stayed as something harder to name. She was practical in the way certain people are practical who have seen enough difficulty to stop romanticizing it. And she had a gift for reading Seraphine that Seraphine had long since given up trying to prevent. "Your hands are flat on the bed," Myra said from the doorway. "I know. You only do that when something has happened that you're trying to decide how to survive. I know that too." Myra came in and closed the door and sat in the chair across the room and waited, which was one of the things Seraphine valued most about her. "Cassin has made an offer," Seraphine said, finally. Myra's face went flat and careful, which meant she had already suspected something. Of the sort, what kind? The permanent kind. A long silence, and, Myra said, and I am deciding. Sira, he is not wrong that my options are limited. Sira, Myra's voice was quiet and very precise. Tell the king. Seraphine's hands pressed flatter against the blanket. I will not make myself his problem. You are not a problem. You are being maneuvered by a man who smiles while he does it. Those are different things. Seraphine said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that would not require her to admit what Myra already knew, that the reason she would not go to Aldrich was not practicality. It was the particular cowardice of someone who cannot bear to be looked at directly by the one person whose gaze they have always tried to avoid. She did not have to go to him. He came to her, not that evening. The following morning, before the palace was fully awake, when the corridors smelled of cold stone and wood smoke from the night's dying fires. She was in the library. She was often in the library at that hour, before the day required a composed face, and she heard his steps before she heard anything else because she had, she realized, memorized the sound of him walking without ever deciding to. He closed the door behind him. He stood across the room. Cassin spoke to me last night, he said. She kept her eyes on the page she wasn't reading. Then you know. I denied the request. The words landed quietly. She looked up. You denied it, she said. I denied it. His voice was steady, but there was something behind it that wasn't something she couldn't name yet, something she was almost afraid to. Under my seal as king. Which means Cassin cannot renew it through any other channel without challenging the crown directly. She understood, then, what he had done. He had not simply refused. He had made it personal, attached his name, his authority, his reputation to the refusal. Cassin could not ignore a king's seal without consequence. Cassin, with his careful patience, would never court that kind of exposure. He had protected her, publicly, at cost. She felt something move in her chest that she refused to name. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. I know what it will look like. She looked at him then, the way she almost never let herself look, directly, without the careful distance. He was watching her with an expression she could not entirely read, but the edges of it were something she recognized. The particular quality of attention a person gives something they have decided matters. Why? She said. He did not answer immediately. The fire burned low in the grate behind him. The room smelled of old paper and ash. Because Cassin is not what he appears, he said, finally. And you have been too careful for too long to be sold off to a man whose patience is a weapon. It was true. It was also, she knew, not the whole truth. Neither of them said so. They stayed in the library until the morning found them. Not talking, at first. She went back to the book she wasn't reading, and he took the chair beside the fire, and the silence between them was the kind that doesn't need filling, the kind that has weight and temperature and its own particular shape. The fire burned down to embers. She got up to add wood, and he was already there, doing it, and their hands were briefly close, and neither of them acknowledged it, and both of them felt it. She poured water from the carafe on the reading table, held the cup without drinking it. You look tired, she said, because it was true and because it was safer than the other things. I am always tired. He said it without self-pity, just fact. That is the one thing I have always been. She recognized her own words in his mouth, and something in her chest tightened. That's not funny, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. He was sitting in the firelight, and he looked, for a moment, younger than he ever let himself look in the rest of the palace. Not soft, he was never soft, but unguarded. The kind of unguarded that happens at dawn, when a person forgets for a moment that they're being watched. She looked away. What do you want, Seraphine? He said it quietly, without pressure, the way a person asks a question they already know will be difficult. She held the cup in both hands. The water had gone cold. She stopped, started again. I want to stop being peripheral. I want to stop standing in alcoves and adjacent rooms and watching everything from the edge." She paused. "I have been standing at the edge of things for so long I've forgotten what it's like to be in the middle of one." Something moved in his expression. He did not speak. "That is what I want," she said. "If you're asking." He looked at the fire. "I'm asking," he said. Then someone knocked, 3 rapid knocks, the sound of urgency, and the door opened before either of them could reach it, and it was the king's steward, pale and tilting his head slightly right. And whatever the morning had been trying to become rearranged itself back into the shape of the palace and its demands. The threat Cassin posed was not finished with the refusal. They learned this by midday. He had gone to the betrothed, to Lady Asara, who was young and new and did not yet understand the corridors of this palace the way Seraphine did. He had spoken to her of Seraphine's history, her debts, her years of proximity to the king had chosen his. Words with the careful precision of a man who knew exactly how to poison without leaving marks. Lady Asara, to her credit, had not acted immediately, but her ladies had talked. And the court, which was always hungry, had taken the whispers and done what courts did. By the afternoon feast, 3 lords had quietly suggested to the king that it might be wise, diplomatically speaking, of course, to remove Seraphine Vale from her palace position entirely. For clarity, for the sake of the betrothal. Aldrich heard them. He heard all of them with the particular stillness that Seraphine had learned to read years ago, the stillness that meant he was not managing his anger, he was containing it, which was different. Then he did something that made the great hall go very quiet. He stood. Not dramatically, not with ceremony. He simply stood at the head of the table, and the room went quiet the way rooms do when the person standing is the kind of person who does not stand for small reasons. "Seraphine Vale," he said, clearly and into the silence, "holds her position in this palace by my direct authority. That position is not subject to diplomatic suggestion, social comfort, or the private agendas of men who mistake patience for virtue." He did not look at Cassin. He did not need to. She stays. 2 words, into absolute silence. Seraphine, at the far end of the table, felt the heat of every eye in the room before she felt anything else. She kept her face composed and her hands still and her spine precisely straight. She did not look at him either. She looked at the candle in front of her. This one was still burning. She heard Myra's breath beside her release very quietly. The feast resumed. Cassin smiled at nothing and said nothing and left early, which told her everything she needed to know about how thoroughly he had miscalculated. The court buzzed with the particular electricity of a room that has witnessed something it will be talking about for years and is still deciding what it means. Later, when the hall had emptied to its bones and the servants were clearing the last of the candles, she found Aldrich standing at the western arch. The same arch she had used to leave 3 nights before. He had his back to the room. He was looking at the dark courtyard beyond. She went and stood beside him, not close, the appropriate distance, and then, after a moment slightly closer than that, they did not speak for a long time. "You'll have made enemies," she said. "I already had enemies, new ones. Also already had those." She looked at the courtyard. Cold air came through the arch and brought the smell of frost and pine, and she thought, not for the first time, that the palace at night smelled like him. "Why?" she said, again, the same question. He turned to look at her then, and the candle light from the hall behind them was low and amber, and it caught the edges of him in warmth. "You already know," he said. "I want you to say it." A long pause, long enough that she thought he wouldn't. Long enough that she started to build the composure she would need if he didn't. "You bowed for another," he said quietly. "I have never knelt for anything that wasn't worth the cost." She looked at him. The hall was empty. The candles were low. His eyes held the firelight the way they always did, somewhere deep and still, and she understood, with the particular clarity that comes only when you've stopped lying to yourself, that she had been seen all along. Not in the way she feared. Not observed and catalogued and considered, seen, the specific, irreversible kind. "I have never knelt for anything that wasn't worth the cost." She did not answer. She had no words for it that felt adequate, and she had learned over years that inadequate words were worse than silence. But she did not step back. That, she thought, was its own kind of answer. Lord Casson left the palace within the week. Not forced. Aldrich did not force him, which was a more elegant punishment, because it meant Casson left of his own reading of the situation, which meant the loss was entirely his own. He returned to the river marches with his patience and his proposals and the comprehensive understanding that he had played a careful game and been outplayed without the other side appearing to play at all. Lady Asara came to find Seraphine 3 days after the feast. It was unexpected. Seraphine had been prepared for coolness, for the careful hostility of a woman who had been handed reasons for it. What she had not been prepared for was Asara sitting across from her, with her hands folded and saying, with the directness of someone young enough not to have learned to hide it yet, "I want to understand what's real here, not the court's version. Yours." Seraphine had looked at her, this young woman with her clear eyes and her northern manners and her entire future arranged without her consultation, and had told her the truth. Not all of it, but the shape of it. That she had loved a man she had no right to. That she had chosen to step aside before the stepping was required. That she had not done it beautifully or without cost. That she was not, and had never been, a threat to what Asara was being offered. Asara had listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she had said, quietly, "The betrothal is to be dissolved." "He told my father last night." Seraphine had said nothing for a long moment. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Don't be." Isara's voice was measured, careful, the voice of a woman already learning the composure this place required. "He was honest with my father. He said it would not be fair to either of us." A small pause. "I think I understand what he meant." She left after that, and Seraphine sat for a long time with her hands in her lap and the particular feeling of something shifting on its axis. It was a month later when she found the library again at dawn. It was not accident. It had not been accident the first time either, and they both knew that now. The fire was lit. She had come to think of that as his signal, the small, deliberate thing, and he was already there in the same chair, and the room smelled of ash and old paper, and the particular cold that came through the window she never remembered to close. She closed it this time. She poured water, brought him a cup. Kept one for herself. "You dissolved it," she said. "Yes, you didn't tell me. I'm telling you now." She sat down, not at the adjacent table, in the chair across from his, closer to the fire than she usually allowed herself. Close enough that she could see the particular tiredness in his face that she had always recognized, the weight that never fully lifted. "I'm still peripheral," she said. "Not from where I'm sitting." She looked at him. He was looking back, and it was the same quality of attention as before, certain, deliberate, but without the careful distance that had always been part of it. She thought about the bow, the cold candle, the way she had stood at the Western Arch and told herself it was over. She thought about a dead candle and a living one and the small, enormous difference between them. "Aldrich," she said. "I know," he said. The fire crackled low. The room smelled of pine through the window she had just closed, or maybe that was him still. She had stopped being able to tell the difference. She unfolded her hands. She had been holding them folded for years. Outside, the palace was beginning to wake, the first distant sounds of the day starting up, the world arranging itself back into the shape it wore in daylight. In a little while they would both be required for other things. He would be king, and she would be whatever she was becoming, and there would be forms and protocols and the long, careful work of building something in a place not built for it. But the fire was still burning, and she was not standing at the edge. She lifted her cup, drank. He did the same. The morning came in, quiet and certain, through the gap she had not fully closed. Some things, she thought, you let in.